Hello. Okay, we're here. We're live. We're ready to rock. Thank you all. Woo! Yeah, round of applause. Welcome everyone to the Almond stage, specifically to the Almond Leadership Program Special Project winner, Michelle Brazil with Olam. Really excited to introduce Michelle today, but first and foremost, want to say a huge shout out to the 2020-2021 Almond Leadership Program class sitting right here. This was our first class that was a 2-year class thanks to COVID, but they made it through. They were awesome, and they were a great crew to work with, and super proud of all that you guys have done the past 2 years. With that, I want to introduce Michelle Brazil to I'm not even going to try to do her title because it's very long, but she will explain her project. And Michelle, congratulations.
Thank you, Rebecca. All right. Thanks for sticking it out with us, but good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. For those of you who don't know, although I'm pretty sure most of you in this crowd know me already, my name is Michelle Brazil, and I work for Olam Farming. I decided to do my almond leadership project on the disinfestation efficiency almond pasteurization processes to control the Indian meal moth and the red flower beetle. So we'll get into the details next. So a bit of background about pasteurization and really the idea behind this project. As many of you know, pasteurization is a process that is used to treat almonds and eliminate any potential contamination in the product. And this is really done without altering the almond's quality, nutritional value, and sensory qualities. Although the California almond industry adopted pasteurization as a mandatory method back in 2007 as a 4-log salmonella reduction, there really were no studies that were conducted to really test the disinfestation efficiencies of stockpiled insects. So that's really what I did with my project. I took the red flower beetle and the Indian meal moth, and we tested it on the 4 most common pasteurization processes you see in the industry today, which is steam under vacuum, inline steam, PPO, and phosphine fumigation. And so really the idea behind this project came as part of my job at Olam. I was responsible for the claims department where I evaluated, and I reported data found on any claims we received. And there was one summer where we had a handful of live infestation claims on pasteurized product. And I thought that's really unique. You know, that's really the whole point of pasteurization. So why are there live insects in this pasteurized product? And so with a quick Google search, I didn't find any reports that really told me one way or another. So I brought the idea to the Almond board, and they actually liked it so much they sponsored my project, and they partnered me with Dr. Sandeepa Gautam, who works for the UC Riverside at the Kearney Research Center in Parlier, California. So her and I and her team, we sat down and we planned, we decided how we were going to plan to research and evaluate the disinfestation efficiencies of the pasteurization processes. So onto the materials and the methods that we used for this project. As you guys know, we tested the Indian meal moth and the red flower beetle, and we did all life cycles. So we had young and old eggs, young and old larvae, pupae, adults, and also infested almonds. And the idea behind the infested almonds part was really to replicate a real-life infestation if you were to have that in your product. Again, we did this at all 4 pasteurization methods, so steam under vacuum, inline steam, propylene oxide, and phosphine fumigation. And then this was done at 2 industry-approved pasteurization facilities, Houston Nut in Livingston, California, and H2O Express in Newman, California. And then all the pre-treatment setup and evaluation was done with Sandeepa and her team at the Research Center in Parlier. So first things first, we obviously needed the insects for the project. The insect specimens were cultured at the United States Department of Agriculture in their research center, and then the insects were cultured by being placed into the sectary, by being put into a rearing unit, which is just basically a space that allows the insects to grow and multiply into their different life cycles. And then once all the life cycles were ready to be collected, we then transferred them across the street to the laboratory where we collected each individual life cycle. So first we collected the eggs, and the method for obtaining the eggs was done by transferring them into a petri dish with their respective diets and then into the rearing unit. We fed white flour to the Indian meal moth and wheat bran to the red flower beetle, and then after 24 hours we collected the young eggs, and after 72 hours we collected the old eggs. And then we needed to count them, and this was done through a microscope, which you can see me on the left doing here. We counted 5,200 eggs for each individual experiment. and the eggs were transferred onto that black piece of filter paper, which was just like a sticky tape. It kept the eggs in place, obviously, because they're small and there would really be no other way to keep them through the pasteurization process. So once we counted 50 to 100 eggs, we rolled up the filter paper and we placed it in the wire cylinders you can see on the desk beside me. And that really just acted as a stability for the paper so it didn't get lost or anything through the pasteurization process. These were then transferred into mesh bags, which were in preparation for the experiment. Next, we collected the eggs. So the way we obtained larvae. The way we obtained the larvae was done the same way we did for the eggs, and then how we counted them was by spreading the culture diet into a plastic tray, and then we counted 50 to 60 larvae for each experiment, and then the young larvae were the second and third instars, and the old larvae were the fourth and fifth instars, and an instar is really just the developmental stages of the insects between their molts. Again, these are placed in a mesh bag in preparation for the experiment. Onto the pupae. So pupae was also obtained the same way we did for the other life cycles. We then collected them out of this putation roll you see in the picture, and then they were placed in a mesh bag in preparation for the experiment. Next, we had the adults. Same thing. They were obtained the same way we did for the rest of the life cycles. When they were ready to be collected, we aspirated them out of this glass jar into the plastic vial, which you see in my hand, and then we very carefully transferred them into a mesh bag in preparation for the experiment. Again, infested almonds. The method for obtaining the infested almonds was done by transferring the Indian meal moth and red flower beetle colonies into a glass jar that held about 3 pounds of the almonds, and then we placed them in an incubator 6 to 8 weeks prior to the experiment, which just allowed enough time for them to develop and multiply into the different life cycles. And this really just simulates a real-life infestation scenario if you were to see infestation in any product. Okay, on to the treatments. Again, all specimens were prepared the morning of the experiment at the research center in Parlier, and they were then driven to the respective plant. So Parlier to Newman and then Parlier to Houston at the beginning of every experiment. And there was a total of 7 bags for all experiments, young and old eggs, young and old larvae, pupae, adults, and then infested almonds. And then each specimen was tested 3 times on all 4 pasteurization methods. So as you can imagine, that's so much preparation, it's so much evaluation, it's so much communication. So I really couldn't have done this project without my friends at Houston Nut, my friends at H2O Express, and also Sandeepa and her team. They definitely made this possible. And then each pasteurization experiment had a controlled box, and that really just acted as comparable data when we would compare the live pasteurized insects versus the ones that didn't get treated. So first we did steam under vacuum, and the experiment to evaluate steam under vacuum was done at H2O Express. Once the mesh bags arrived there the morning of the experiment, we took a 150-pound box, removed about 1/3 of the contents of almonds. We placed the mesh bags back into the box, and then we closed it back up. This chamber holds about 20 pallets, so we picked a pallet in the front, middle, and end of the chamber, which you can see in the diagram, the bottom. And you can see the top right, I'm pointing to our experiment case. So then those went into pasteurization, and steam under vacuum is 1 hour steam under vacuum with a target temperature of 158 degrees Fahrenheit. A controlled box was set outside the chamber. Once that process was completed, we collected all the mesh bags in the controlled box, and it was brought back to the research center in Parlier. Next, we have Inline Steam, which we did at Houston Nut in Livingston, California. The mesh bags were all tied together and then randomly placed on the belt so that when they went through pasteurization, we didn't lose them just because they're loosely placed on the pasteurization belt. The process for Inline Steam is exposed for 76 seconds of steam temperature at 215 degrees Fahrenheit, and then it goes into the oven at 405 degrees Fahrenheit. And then they get transferred to the cooling unit for 4 minutes at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, a controlled box was placed outside that line. Once it was completed, everything was collected and taken back to the research center for evaluation. Next, we have propylene oxide, which was also done at Houston Nut. The way that we allocated these cartons and loaded them into the chamber was a really similar way we did steam under vacuum, just because the chambers look really similar. So again, we picked a pallet, the front, middle, and back of that chamber, and it went into PPO. The PPO process goes into the pre-treatment room for 3 days at target temperature 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The PPO chamber then for 4 hours, and then it has to go into the off-gas room for 2 days. Controlled box also went along this process as well, and then when everything was done, it was collected and brought back to the research center for evaluation. Last, we had Phosphine Fumigation, which was also done at Houston Nut. This chamber holds about 240 bins, so we picked a bin that was the second row, second column, front, middle, and back of the chamber. We dug about 4 inches down into the product. We placed our mesh bags, and then they went in to fumigation, which is a 5-day process at 500 parts per million. A controlled box also went along this process, and then again, everything was collected and taken back to Kearney for the research. So onto our post-treatment evaluation results. Again, all specimens were evaluated at the research center, and the mortality of the eggs and the pupae were diagnosed by no development into the next life cycle, and then the mortality of eggs and larvae were diagnosed 24 hours after treatment due to lack of motion. And you can see in these images here the visual difference between the dead insects and the live ones. All right, what you guys have all been waiting for are the results. So the steam under vacuum results, so after the 1-hour treatment for 158 degrees Fahrenheit, it resulted in 100% mortality of all the life cycles. And then the untreated controlled specimens were minimally effective, which proves that steam under vacuum is a very effective way to control both the Indian meal moth and the red flower beetle. Inline steam exposure, 76-second steam treatment, 215 degrees, oven for 405 degrees in the cooling unit, resulted in 100% mortality of the Indian meal moth and the red flower beetle. Again, uncontrolled specimens were minimally effective, proving that inline steam is a very effective way to control both of these insects. Propylene oxide, the propylene oxide exposure also resulted in 100% mortality of both the Indian meal moth and the red flower beetle. Again, untreated controlled specimens were minimally effective, proving that PPO is a very effective way to control all life cycles of the Indian meal moth and the red flower beetle. Lastly, phosphine fumigation, 5 days exposure to phosphine fumigation, 500 parts per million, also resulted in 100% mortality of the Indian meal moth and the red flower beetle. Untreated controlled specimens were minimally effective, proving that fumigation is, again, a very effective way to control all life cycles of the Indian meal moth and the red flower beetle. So on to conclusion and future research idea, my project does prove that all pasteurization methods which you see in the industry today do effectively control all life cycles of the Indian meal moth and the red flower beetle. So if you do come across any infestation in pasteurized product, it's likely due to reinfestation. So we took a little bit of a closer look at that with the teams, and as a supplier to almonds also, we thought, one way we can mitigate this issue was by reviewing a food processor's food safety program. And some advice that we could offer is making sure that the amount of pasteurized load is outside of a controlled area is very minimized. When a load completes pasteurization, it should be taken directly to the cold storage. And I say cold storage because those are kept at low enough temperatures that these insects won't develop and multiply. It's not possible because they can't live in temperatures that cold. And make sure that these areas are designated for pasteurized product only, so you don't have the option of cross-contamination between unpasteurized versus pasteurized product with the insects. And the storage unit should be checked regularly for cracks and crevices that might inhibit any insects. They should also be well maintained so that there aren't any spills or debris that might attract these insects as well. And then one of the most effective ways we've found to be able to monitor and control insects is by placing pheromone traps at every exit and entry, and also maybe around the parameter of the storage facility, and then check them regularly. Part of my job at OLOM in the claims department was also to be sit in on some audits, and some of our most successful processors, they do in fact send somebody around their plant to check and monitor the traps every morning, afternoon, and evening. And it's also a lot cheaper to send somebody around the plant to check that than it is to completely reprocess, pack, pasteurize a load that you need to give back to the customer who might have had this issue. And then another thing to take into consideration is really how close your facility is to a hole or sheller where these stockpiled insects are obviously regularly seen there too. One thing that I didn't mention in my slide also is, as a processor to customers, I think it's really important to play a good partnership with your customers and the other suppliers that you use as well. I think it's important to share data and share knowledge and, visit the customers' plants and really see what they're doing with their inbound, their outbound, how are they storing product, and offer them any advice that you might have for them about the almond industry and these products that they might not know about. I think that does go a long way with your customers. So with that, we think that future research can really be done on trying to identify the reinfestation and how you can mitigate these issues. You could do this by placing traps inside or outside the product and see if there's any testing that's chemical or non-chemical. I know fumigation is like one of the last places that a load will see before it gets loaded on a truck to its final destination, but that is a 5-day process. So I think if we could combine heads and really get together to see if there's any other resources out there that can help us mitigate this issue when loads are pasteurized before they do get on a truck to go to their final destination, I think that's really what we're all out here to do. So with that, I'd love to say thank you so much for being here. It was awesome to have an in-person almond leadership or an almond conference. I'm so thankful for all the beautiful faces that wanted to come watch me speak. So I don't know where Rebecca is, but if they're supposed to ask questions or not, I don't know where Rebecca went. Oh, we want to pass the mic around. Does anybody have questions? Oh, thank you. We had a blast. It was a good time, and I couldn't have done it with all my participants. We really had a great class, and I think if you're thinking about joining the leadership program, I definitely put your application in. It was a great experience for me, and I got some good industry knowledge for the rest of you out of it. Yes, Raj. It was a lot of like planning. You know, I said we tested both insects 3 times on all 4 pasteurization methods. So just finding the time, you know, everybody else has their own family. They have their own processes that they have to keep up at work. But I am thankful for OLAM and the flexibility that they allowed me to just do this in the time that I had. So yeah, there's definitely the planning part was probably pretty difficult because I'm traveling from Kingsburg to Fresno, Parlier, Newman, Livingston. So it was a lot of work, but I was excited with the outcome. Yes, Kyle? I didn't look into the cost on which one was more cost effective. That might be a Ranjit question. But just because our project, really, HughesNet was offering their services as a volunteer, I didn't really look at the cost of which one's cheaper. I should know that because I did logistics for those products, but I don't know which one's cheaper, Kyle. I don't know if you guys do. Oh, yes, lad. What was that? Yeah. Yeah, they get checked. They get checked before, they get checked after, and I think they probably report it down on some kind of sheet just to make sure that it's being monitored. Yeah, but before product goes in. But even if there was insects in it, it's going through pasteurization where it's going to kill them regardless. But yeah. This is the PPO chamber. Yeah. Yeah, the shipping receiving team is responsible for checking. They have a whole checklist that they're supposed to look at before they physically load the pallets into a container before it does get shipped. It's a whole part of their process, receiving and outbound. Anyone else? Yes. Yeah, we also couldn't have done it without the Almond board and their support as well. Awesome. Great questions. Thanks for everyone's support.